2 days ago, I boarded a flight from LHR to JFK. It was August 15th, 2016. I never sleep when I fly except for the occasional 12 plus hour trip. I take at least 50 flights every year and I still get so excited I can barely sit still. My job's fleet planning and aircraft financing, with the exception of a few Russian and Chinese models. I've flown on every type of passenger jet currently used by a commercial airline in the developed world. I took invitation only flights on the 787, 8-8 and 8350-WXB. Before they entered service, I've experienced bird strikes, extreme turbulence, and emergency landing firsthand. I know within I know what's normal during a commercial flight. My LHR JFK flight, which I'll give the fictional flight number US1 for privacy reasons, got weird about 30 minutes after we passed Iceland on the moving map. It was started out like turbulence but turned into something else. The aircraft was being pulled and stretched from side to side while remaining level. The captain, an American with a deep southern accent, made an announcement that was warped and interrupted by loud static. At one point, it felt like we inverted, but nobody was dangling by their seatbelts. During the inversion phase, all electronic devices shut down and the cabin went dark, including the emergency floor lights. There was complete silence until I felt the aircraft right itself and the engineers and floor lights came back online. However, the seatback consoles didn't boot back up and my phone was dead. The man sitting across the aisle complained that his watch had stopped. My login's flagship automatic was still ticking. And about 10 minutes had passed since the weirdness began. With the 30 seconds, the cabin was a catastrophe of what the fuck and my isn't my anything isn't working and what time is it? The pilots didn't make any announcement for the rest of the flight. The appropriate length of time passed, but as we descended, I realized we were not in New York. The skyline was a uniform row of chrome and glass towers. It got stranger after a very long, rough landing. US 1, a 747-400, stopped in the middle of the tarmac, and we all disembarked through a single door using stairs. Airport workers gathered around to stare. The livery was faded and the plane was completely covered by rust like it had been in one of those aircraft boneyards waiting to be scrapped. The exterior was peeling apart and the number 2 engine dangling uh, precarious from the wing. A chuck of horizontal stabilizer was missing. The aircraft door had fallen off when it opened. I have no idea how it landed in mostly one piece. A dozen other aircraft were in my line of sight outside the terminal, but I couldn't identify a single model. Some were similar to Concorde jets, but with curved wings that looked like a giant A320 sharklets. Others looked like supersized X-wing fighters with A380 fuselages and a fifth tail mounted engine. Several self-driving buses pulled up to take us to the terminal, and each group of around 30 people was brought to a different entrance. Our bus led to an unsettling airport concourse. The basic layout of the facility was familiar, but the details were all wrong. None of the screen signs, advertisements, or verbal announcements used the language I know. Even the cities displayed at each gate had names I'd never even seen before. However, I found I could interpret bits and pieces in a way that made sense because they resembled English, French, Spanish, or Latin. Many of the parts I couldn't translate resembled German and Russian and Arabic, and other languages I can identify but can't understand. All of these elements were blended into a single language like a more diverse Esperanto. My bus group made its way down the corridor and arrived at a customs facility where we were divided into many different lines. I was the first from US 1 in my lane. When I reached When I reached the front, I greeted the male employee who was processing travelers, which seemed to confuse him. The people ahead of me swiped small key fob under a scanner, then waited for the man to check his monitor and push the button that opened a glass gate in the baggage claim area. I tried scanning my U.S. passport, which yielded a shrill burst of beeps and tones that drew the attention of everyone in line. I handed it to the guy instead. He slowly flipped through the pages like he'd never seen anything like it before, then said, "Nomavu?" When I hesitated, he pointed to his unreadable employee ID tag and then to me, so I told him my name. He accepted my answer and asked, "Spelling is my best guess." Lopez. My gut said this meant country, so I replied United States. He gestured toward a small flag at his station and represented the question, so I tried America. After thinking for a few seconds, he raised his hand with the palm outward and said, or tendre, or tendre, then called and spoke to someone briefly. Several other uniformed employees emerged from an office while I waited, then escorted me to a separate screening area. I was internally freaking out, but they were all as polite as one can be without words. A woman mentioned for me to stand up with my arms extended, then waved a small device in front of my body. She looked at the screen, nodded, then had me sit down on a bench. She and a male officer began searching my purse and carry-on. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, and makeup were quickly set aside on the table. My iPod and laptop got a once over and a shrug, and my officer poked a few random buttons on my BlackBerry before setting aside. Money, credit cards, receipts, books, magazine, and medications received careful scrutiny. A dog-eared copy of The Beautiful and the Damned and an issue of the Economics were passed out. They appeared to understand the generic medical salts label on my Adderall, and the mail searcher laid it on top of my clothes with a researching nod in my direction. The blister pack of birth control pills generated some confused chatter. I panicked for a moment and wondered if contraceptives were illegal wherever I was, but then the female officer popped a couple of active pills out, put them in her mouth, and held out the package to her colleague like she was offering him a stick of gum. He smiled sheepishly at me, took a few for himself, then put the rest next to the Adderall. Neither of them seemed surprised or disappointed by what they'd just eaten. After the search, they nearly repacked my things, minus a confiscated hand dryer, a bill, and the stub for my airline ticket, and went back into the office to retrieve a map. The landmasses were identical to Earth's, except a large chunk of North American West Coast was now separated by a narrow body of water, and the northernmost parts of Norway, Sweden, and Finland appeared to be underwater. Every country had a new name, and every border was different. The northern border of what resembled the United States was at the 49th parallel from coast to coast, putting differently named versions Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal inside U.S. territory. Alaska and Greenland were part of Canada. Mexico included most of Central America. The borders within South America, Africa, and the Middle East had been redrawn from scratch. Western Europe consisted of one northern and one southern country within a border across the middle of France. A large nation shaped like the USSR covered most of Eastern Europe. India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh were one nation, and several smaller Southeast Asian countries had merged together as well. Japan and most of mainland China were the same country. The Koreas were unified. There were a lot more changes I've forgotten since then. The female officer wrote an X where New York City would have been on the map, that then gestured to herself to indicate that we were there. She opened my passport, pointed to the United States of America, and handed me her pen. I drew a circle around the continental U.S. She pulled out my ticket stub and circled LHR and JFK. So I put a second X over London, then drew a line across the Atlantic to connect it to the first X. Some new guys came and out of the office, picked up the map, and went back inside. My bags were handed to me, then I was escorted down several hallways to a small room with a cot, a desk, and a chair. There were there was an adjoining closet-sized powder room with a toilet and sink. It was clearly designed as a holding cell for detainees, but the woman smiled at me and left the cell door unlocked so I could move freely through a wing that included several other cells. A shower room and a lounge area with cushions and books. I spent about 36 hours there, with uniformed officers visiting frequently to check on me or bring meals. The food was mostly bland energy bars and protein shakes that came in sealed containers with indecipherable labels. I saw a couple of officers drinking the same shakes when they stopped by, so I don't think this was special prisoner food. Water and juice came in metal canisters with strange twist and pull tops that an officer had to show me how to open. Everyone was friendly, but some of them seemed very nervous around me. I tried charging my phone, but I couldn't plug it into the type of power outlet this facility had. I was able to boot up my laptop briefly, but it seemed to short out and shut itself down after a few seconds. I gave up and nearly I gave up and read my book for a while. My watch still worked, and when nearly 40 hours had passed since boarding flight US-1, I decided I'd try to sleep. I went into my holding cell, dimmed the lights, and dozed off. It felt like a few more hours had passed when I awoke to a man entering my room. I'm a light sleeper, so I immediately sat up and asked who was there. He made a startled noise, lunged at me, and covered my mouth with his hands. I flailed and kicked and bit until he whispered, "You weren't supposed to come here. I can take you home," with a slight English accent. I couldn't see him very well in the dark, but I could feel his wool suit and silk tie against my arms and legs and smell the vanilla and sandalwood notes of his cologne and a hint of lingering cigarette smoke. He felt and sounded familiar, but I couldn't place him. Hearing someone speak my own language stunned me into silence, but I couldn't respond. A needle jabbed my arm, and I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember is sitting in a business class seat on an empty 747-400 at Keflavik Airport. My bags were under the seat in front of me. My vision was blurry, but I couldn't tell. But I could tell I was in New York. I waved over a flight attendant, the only other person around, and as we were, she grinned and said, "You must have slept through everything. We had some mechanical difficulties and turned around to make an emergency landing in Reykjavik. The other passengers have already disembarked, and everyone has been rebooked onto another flight to New York. You can get your new boarding pass from any of our gate agents inside the terminal." I got off the plane and collapsed into the nearest empty seat at the gate. I checked my phone, which was working perfectly, and saw that only 4 hours had passed since I left London. The airport clocks confirmed, but my watch was off by several hours that couldn't be explained by the time zone changes. I'm sure many of you will assume that the only things that happened here were a nightmare and a watch malfunction, and I would love to do that as well. Maybe I really did leave my hairdryer in the hotel bathroom in my rush to get Heathrow. Maybe I spent the dollar in a vending machine while I waited to board my flight. A US dollar in a UK vending machine. Maybe between the red-eye flight across the pond last week and the jet lag that followed. I misread the day labels and took a few bit of extra birth control pills. 5 extra birth control pills. Maybe the tiny spot of blood inside the part of my sleeve that would have touched the injection site is just an old stain. Maybe I really did sleep through 300 plus passengers getting off the plane before me when I landed in Reykjavik. Maybe all those Brits and Americans who boarded the flight with me blended in so well that I didn't notice or any of my fellow passengers in the terminal at Clefakik or on the half-filled 757 that flew me the rest of the way to New York. And maybe it was a coincidence that the captain who winked at me from the cockpit as I exited the plane. Henri Chevek, who smelled like vanilla and sandalwood and tobacco, thanked me for flying with him in a British accent.